Of a working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. How many people remember Herman Cain? Remember the Herman Cain train? The pizza man with the 999 plan? Every piece of legislation that he was going to pass would be no more than 2 or 3 pages long, something you could read over dinner. So big complex ideas like, changing the nation's health care, 2 pages. I guess really small print. But the reason I bring Herman Cain up, do you remember do you remember him reporting that he attended the rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that the atmosphere was exciting and inspiring? Do you remember that? Well, today his Twitter account said that he has tested positive for the coronavirus and that he is currently receiving treatment in a hospital in Atlanta. And you go, I don't ever like to be the guy to go, well, you deserved it. But, this is one of those things where we've been being told, don't do these things. Don't go out into these large events. Don't go to big crowds, wear your damn mask, do all of that stuff. And yet, the cheerleaders out there saying, no. Well, here Herman Cain now has the coronavirus. And look, I wish him the best. I hope he recovers. He's an older guy. This is not good for older people. But I don't wish him dead. Little suffering, not against, but not dead. But Herman was one of the 52,788 cases yesterday of the coronavirus, a new single-day high. For all those people who think it's over, it's not. And in fact, they are saying that the virus that we fought off a couple of months ago is not the same virus that we're seeing today. It has mutated, and it's actually much more contagious. So, yay. And I guess you could make the argument that that's the reason that Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, has done an about-face and has now ordered statewide use of face masks and limiting gatherings to no more than 10 people. All that stuff that we were doing a couple months ago while they were saying, no, we're not doing it. And in fact, you may remember that Governor Abbott just a month ago issued an executive order that banned all of the local governments from imposing fines on people who don't wear masks. Because there were local areas that are going, hey, we need a way to enforce this. It's one thing to put out an executive order. It's one thing to have a declaration like we have here in Pennsylvania. Our governor and our health secretary, there's a mask mandate. If you drive around, not a lot of people following it, but we have it. And the reason that no one's following it is, well, no teeth. Texas could be an interesting moment because their governor is finally, and maybe this is a good thing, finally coming around to the idea that this is bad. And every day we're having a new record. So for those who thought that it was over, that wave 1 was over, no, we're still in wave 1 because the second wave wasn't supposed to come to the fall, after school began. So we may ride wave 1 right into wave 2. And as I said, this strain has mutated. They're saying it's more contagious, which is why the guy at the CDC is saying, look, it could be 10 times more than what we think. And it could be more contagious because of that. And you could be exposed to it. So the idea that, we're past it, be very afraid. Also looking at Texas, a Texas megachurch, actually in Dallas, evidently the choir and the orchestra, they have tested positive for the coronavirus. And what's interesting about it is they were tested for it, were exposed to it, and then evidently Mike Pence showed up. And look, it was Freedom Sunday. Who wouldn't want to show up to Freedom Sunday, free to, well, expose the vice president to the coronavirus? And again, not against it. Don't wish him dead. A little suffering I'm not against, because I believe he's a big part of the problem that we've got. Now, interestingly enough, as I was reading through the article, evidently, health experts have, said, we need to, shy away from, being indoors, especially singing and using wind instruments in large groups. And, you go, well, yeah, because you're literally just spitting on people. Some people may sound really good singing. They're still spitting on you. Like my daughter plays, one of those I think the clarinet or something. She's literally spitting through the thing. And yet our vice president went and gave his little Freedom Sunday spiel, of which, well, don't worry about it. It's over. It's over. It's going to be fine. Donald Trump said it'll just disappear. Just going to disappear. Not a problem. Anyway, good news on the jobs front. 4.8 million people went back to work. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the virus. I don't know how many of these people wanted to go back to the work environment. With this large number of people going back, we'll see. We'll see how much of that translates into increased numbers of people being infected. Now our economy is in trouble because the Government Accountability Office, or the Government Budget Office, they're predicting that the unemployment rate is not going to hit the pre-pandemic levels until at least 2030. So we're looking at about a decade to return to the job numbers that we once had. And this is one of those things where you go, I was reading an opinion piece over at Bloomberg by a guy named Noah Smith, and I highly suggest taking a look at it. It's titled "Coronavirus Brings American Decline Out into the Open." And, he made a lot of really interesting points because, my wife and I have had these conversations as well. You see construction sites that aren't finished and there aren't people there. You see, building projects that have just stopped. You see, local businesses that the storefronts are still closed. And, you start seeing these things. And this isn't just because of the pandemic. This has been the last several years. And you see how life is changing and how things are getting more expensive and more difficult. Housing prices are going up. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We've got all of this really perfect storm of crisis. Low wage jobs with no benefits, a healthcare crisis coming, a retirement crisis that's coming. All of these things all going to hit at once. And it all comes back to, and this is where, my mind has been for a while. It's all come back to, Reaganomics and conservative ideology. It's all come back to this pro-business, low tax cuts, less intrusive, deregulatory mindset that's created this environment where you have a mass consolidation of wealth and really two Americas. And, sadly, the America that most of us live in is crumbling. We haven't invested in our roads and our bridges and in broadband and water and sewer and all kinds. We haven't done really any of that stuff in a major way because, well, we've been too busy giving away tax cuts to create more rich people. Jeff Bezos being the one, he saw his wealth go up, was like $50-some billion. Some outrageous number. He's up to $171 billion, his worth, after the divorce. It's crazy. But this guy was making the point that, it slowly happens that we get used to certain things. And one of the things he pointed out that, he goes, look, to sell real estate, you got to pay a 6% commission, where other places in the world, it's like 2%. We get used to these things. And everything gets a little bit more expensive, a little bit further out of reach. And we start to get used to diminished expectations. On the job front, it was, I gotta pay into my health care now. I don't get that defined benefit pension. I have to contribute to a 401k. And all the while, your paycheck is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and your standard of living is getting worse and worse and worse. And now you're being told, well, it's those immigrants and it's those others. It's not the fact that the boss is pocketing tons of money and handing it out to the shareholders. No, it's easier to blame the others. It's the welfare mother. You've heard the stories. And he's saying, look, the reality is we could come into a time where, foreign investment dries up. People, just say, hey, we don't want to go to the U.S. because, hey, they can't control the virus because we can't get out of here anymore. No one will allow us to leave. And his argument is what happens when we no longer get foreign investment? Immigrants no longer want to come here to do the low wage jobs. We no longer are able to take advantage of the import stuff that we get to subsidize our living with cheap goods made by slave labor. He said, it's going to be terrible because we're going to have to raise interest rates to attract capital, and it's going to imitate what happened in the 70s. And he said it's going to make the stagflation of the 70s look simple. And all of this, again, predictable years ago because of the policies that we chose. And we're at one of those weird moments right now. We're in one of those moments where, this 4.8 million job number of people returning is not bad. Good. I mean, people need jobs. But this doesn't mean that we don't need to stimulate the economy and help those people who are being harmed by it. And I fear that number now is going to go, well, we no longer have the appetite to help people. And there'll still be some sweeteners for the campaign donors. And trust me, corporate America and their lobbyists, they're going to figure out how to feed at the trough. Even if there's nothing left, they'll figure out how to get us to refill it. But it got me to thinking, what happens when the stimulus doesn't happen? They say, well, we've added, 7.5 million jobs. Yeah, but you lost, over 30, close to 40? We had a huge number of job losses. They're saying now the unemployment rate's over 11% still. But again, my problem is that when you look deeper into the numbers, those jobs that are going to be permanently lost, those numbers are going up. And I don't think they come back. I've been having this conversation with my daughter about, the things, to pay attention to of what's changing. Like I fully believe that at some point very soon, cash is going to be gone. The idea of using cash money will be gone. And there are people who've wanted that for a while so they can track stuff. Once that's gone, it doesn't come back. Once you lose something, it doesn't come back. And this is why I'm struggling with the moment that we're in, especially with the leadership that we have. Now here, going back to Greg Abbott and the mask thing. There are a number of states across the country who have said, hey, look, you got to wear a mask in public, especially when you go into businesses and all of that. We're not flattening the curve. It's not good. Maybe now the White House will listen, because evidently the heads of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the National Retail Federation, and a bunch of other of these pro-business organizations, the lobbyists with their money, they evidently wrote a letter to the White House today urging that the coronavirus task force work with the governors to make the face coverings mandatory in all public spaces. Now, will that happen? I don't know, but the moneyed people are saying, uh-oh, this is bad. Uh-oh, now we're starting to see it. Before it was just poor people, and it was just, working people, and it was just, old people in nursing homes. Now it's affecting the bottom line. It's affecting people like Herman Cain. Maybe now they'll listen. I don't have a lot of hope, though, because on the same day that the Business Roundtable and the Chamber and all of them sent the letter, you've got crazy Republican Arizona Representative Andy Biggs calling for the White House to dissolve the coronavirus task force because evidently he doesn't like that Fauci and Birx contradict Trump's stated goals and actions on the economy. Evidently, the economy is sacrosanct, and that's all he cares about. So, wow, crazy. Oh, my goodness. Very bizarre. But it gets worse because here's the reality. We still have Trump as the president. And when we come back, John Bolton, former ambassador and former Trump national security advisor, is going to be here to share some thoughts on his new book that's just come out, The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. And look, I'll tell you right from the start, it confirms everything that I've been saying here for the last 3.5 years about Trump and his narcissism and his petulance and his spitefulness and all of the things about the Ukrainian scandal and basically everything that has happened over the last couple of years that we've talked about. He confirms. It's kind of weird because I'm not a John Bolton fan. But when we come back, we'll have the ambassador here to share some thoughts on his book. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day known as the East St. Louis Race Riot. It is considered the worst case of labor-related violence of the 20th century and one of the worst race riots in American history. At the time, East St. Louis, Illinois, was an industrial hub along the Mississippi River across from St. Louis, Missouri. Production demands for World War I intensified the Great Migration. As African Americans emigrated from the South, filling the demand for industrial labor, tensions grew at workplaces and in the communities in which they settled. That spring, black and white workers had been hired to scab on a local strike. The violence began on May 28th when trade unionists marched to the mayor's office protesting the black labor they considered unfair competition. It quickly turned into an anti-black riot. The National Guard was called out to quell the violence. And on this day, 2 days of rioting began when a car of white men drove through a black neighborhood and fired at a group of blacks. Racist mobs killed as many as 200 African Americans. 6,000 more were left homeless. Many remarked bitterly that the police and National Guard stood by, indifferent to the race violence around them. The president of the Illinois Federation of Labor insisted that employers were to blame for using Southern blacks to break the back of labor. Socialist Party leader Eugene V. Debs declared that the riots were, quote, a foul blot upon the labor movement. Debs continued, had the labor movement freely opened their doors to the Negro instead of barring him, the atrocious crime of East St. Louis would have never blackened the pages of American history. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to Labor.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, ricksmithshow.com. So the book, the big book, everything we've been talking about for the last couple of days, sold 728,000 copies. It's The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir written by former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. We've got the ambassador on the line. Ambassador, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So congratulations, I guess, on order, 728,000 copies. I'm sure a lot of money going to be made on that. For me, I got to tell you, as I'm reading through the book, it basically confirmed everything I thought about this president from the start. Someone who is a dangerous combination of petulance, narcissism, and spitefulness. And you confirm that pretty much for me in the book anyway. What do you think people are going to get from that outside of that, especially on the left?
Well, what I try and show in the book, not simply by expressing my opinions or conclusions, although they're in there, that's for sure, but to try and lay out facts that you can put before the people and they'll make up their mind. Some people have already decided they're going to vote against Trump no matter what. Some people have basically decided they're going to vote for Trump no matter what. I think there's still a fair number of people who are undecided. You don't necessarily see that in the public opinion polls. I didn't write this as an advocacy piece. I was writing for history as much as I could. I tried as hard as I could to be accurate. But I think this is something that ultimately, if you can't talk about a president's character and performance during a presidential election campaign, I'm not sure what time you can talk about it.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Ambassador. I mean, this is all stuff that came out in 2015. I mean, this is all stuff that I think most of us were talking about back then, that our media culture just kind of swept aside, and the Republican electorate just didn't care about.
Well, I don't think you could have been talking about it in 2015, since very little of it happened in 2015, and that's.
Well, what I'm talking about is his behavior. I mean,
well, yeah. Look. It's obviously the case that people believed beforehand that it would turn out the way that it has, but I think it's important to document it. There are a lot of people like me in 2016. I voted for Trump. I've been a philosophical conservative since I worked for Barry Goldwater when I was 15 years old in 1964, and I felt that it couldn't be as bad as people said, and I felt that it couldn't be as bad as people said when I went into the government. The book is a story of whether I was right or wrong on that, but I think it's important to get the facts out there, and as John Maynard Keynes, with whom I don't agree on much in policy terms, Keynes once said, "Why, sir, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do?" So I think for a lot of people, seeing the facts might have an impact on them.
Yeah, I hope so. But here's the question that I've got most often from people when I threw it out there. Why now? Why didn't you come forth when it mattered, when we could have actually held this president accountable? Why now?
Well, I would take issue with the conclusion about holding him accountable. I talk about in the book what I call the impeachment malpractice of those who led the charge against him. And I do think it was malpractice. I think they engaged in a strategy that they thought was in their political interest to focus on a very narrow subject, to move the process very quickly so it didn't interfere with the Democratic presidential nomination contest. And it turned out to be a strategy that failed because Trump was acquitted in the Senate. So what it did was ignore the lesson of Watergate. And the lesson of Watergate is complex, but one of the key lessons was that Democrats like Sam Ervin worked with Republicans like Howard Baker to try on some bipartisan basis to establish what actually happened in Watergate. And the consequence was, the first senator to call for Richard Nixon to resign was who? Was not even a Republican. It was Jim Buckley, elected on the Conservative Party line in New York in 1970. And the senators that went to Nixon ultimately and said he had to resign were Republicans, and the one who made the most difference was Barry Goldwater. So that was a significant approach that got what the original advocates of impeachment wanted. They got Nixon out of office. Here, the argument was, well, the impeachment will deter Trump from this kind of conduct in the future. But what they didn't see, or what they didn't care about, was that the acquittal in the Senate doesn't constitute deterrence to Trump. It enables him to do it again if he gets a second term.
And that's the scary part, if there is a second term. And I've had a bunch of people ask, this book is now out. Do you worry about, if he gets a second term, that you're going to find yourself behind bars because of this? Because this is what happens in an authoritarian state. Your leader is going to go after the critics.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt Trump tried to suppress this book. He was quoted in the newspapers saying, well, maybe after the election. That's a concession that the purpose was to keep, had nothing to do with national security. It had to do with protecting him. I think the country can recover from one Trump term. I'm very confident of that. I'm much more worried about a second Trump term. There's no doubt about it.
No, I'm right there with you. But the big story that's broke this week is this story on Russia, paying bounties on American soldiers. Was Trump briefed on this?
Well, look, there's a report out there that I briefed him in 2019. I've said no comment to that report for just the reason we're talking about. I went out of my way to make sure there was no classified information in my book, and I don't want to don't want to step over the line now.
Right.
But I tell you this, and this may surprise your listeners. Susan Rice wrote an op-ed in the New York Times on Monday saying if she were national security advisor now and this information had come to her, she'd take it straight into the Oval Office. And I have to say, I agree with Susan Rice on that. I hope I would have done the same.
No, but the scary part for me is that we're in a moment where we have to question the person who's keeping our soldiers safe, that we have to question his allegiance and question whether he would get the information, whether he would use the information, whether he would listen. All of that stuff is frightful to me because, we're in a much more dangerous world than I think we were 3.5 years ago, with China rising and Russia now taking a much more muscular stance. Look, I find us in a much more dangerous place.
Well, I think we are in a more dangerous place, and it's one of the reasons why the first time in my adult life, even going back to when I was 15, I'm not going to vote for the Republican nominee for president. It's a dramatic change.
Does that mean you're going to vote for Joe Biden?
No, I'm going to write in a conservative. I think that's the best thing I can do to be true to the philosophy that I've worked on for so long. It's not a great election for me. There's no conservative Republican on the ballot.
Yeah. Last question I've got for you, because I know you got to move along. This election is a lot of people are saying the most important of our lifetime, and all elections are important. What do you say to that flag-waving Trump supporter who, is willing to, to go into a Tulsa arena and risk coronavirus to see Donald Trump give his song and dance? What do you say to them about who they're going to vote for?
Well, you and I may both believe that people can read this book and not be swayed by it, and I understand that. But at least if they're going to vote for Trump again, if they read the book, they'll know what they're voting for. I think more people are nervous about Trump in the Republican Party than the polls indicate. That's my sense. They could be wrong, but that's my sense.
Yeah, and I guess on that, and I hope you're right. I hope people are going to read this. I hope they're going to wake up, and I hope they're going to pull the lever in a different direction. But is there a chance he doesn't leave office?
I have not seen any evidence really of that. I understand people are talking about it. Honestly, if there were evidence, I think we'd all be concerned. And to the extent we see any of it, I think people should speak up. But I also think there's plenty to criticize with Trump, and you ought to criticize on the evidence available.
There you go. Ambassador Bolton, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Good stuff. But here again, you look at this, and, as I've been saying for a while, this book, every conservative should read. And I don't say that lightly, because like I said from the beginning, as I'm reading it, and I'm reading it through my biased eyes, and not being a Trump supporter and being someone who's going to say, all of the horrible things that I know that have been going on, the fact that he lies, almost every time he opens his mouth. This kind of made me, it made me, bob my head a lot going, yeah, exactly. He is a narcissist. He is all of these things. He is someone who isn't going to take advice. And it's one of these moments where again, Trump supporters, you should be looking at this because as the ambassador said, and he and I, we agree on almost nothing other than the fact that this guy is a clear and present danger to this country. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
Keeping the chambers of commerce within their gated communities. The Rick Smith Show. Keeping the chambers of commerce within their gated communities. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1822. That was the day that Denmark Vesey was hung for his role in allegedly plotting a slave rebellion in South Carolina. Vesey had been born into slavery in St. Thomas in the Caribbean. From there, he was brought to Charleston, South Carolina. He won the lottery and was able to purchase his freedom at the age of 32. Now a free man, Vesey worked as a skilled Harold Carpenter. He became a founder of a black congregation of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. 4 years after it opened, authorities grew uneasy about the potential of the church to foster unrest among those under slavery. In response, they closed the church. Vasey and others began to organize black resistance to slavery. An informant revealed the plans before the uprising could take place. South Carolina authorities acted swiftly. Vasey stood trial and was found guilty. He was executed along with 35 of his supporters. The AME church was burned to the ground. Hysterical white leaders passed harsh new slave codes aimed at thwarting any future plots. Since his death, historians have debated the true extent of the plot and the evidence put forth at his trial. Vasey's name became a rallying cry in the fight against slavery. The church members continued to meet in secret. After the Civil War, the church formally took the name Emmanuel AME. The church became a symbol in the fight for black civil rights. In 2015, a white 21-year-old gunman murdered 9 people at the Emmanuel Church in a vicious hate crime.
Moses said, "Let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, as I've been saying, in reading Bolton's book, it basically confirms everything that we've been saying for a while. Trump's a narcissist. He's petulant. He doesn't take any advice, doesn't take any of the advice his advisors are giving. And in fact, at one point, Bolton actually goes, and I didn't have time to go into it with him, but he also, it seems like he tries to justify Trump's paranoia with the axis of adults, is what he calls them, advisors from the beginning who are trying to steer him and direct him in a way that isn't going to get us to where we are right now. But according to Bolton's book, this is what led Trump to be distrustful. And I would argue a little generous, well, a lot generous. It's who he was from the beginning. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, not just the ambassador's book, but also where we are as a country. I've asked Joe Walsh to come talk with us. Joe, the former congressman from Illinois, former talk show host, and Twitter firebrand. Joe, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, always love being with you, my friend.
So just got done talking with John Bolton, and not much new. He's not voting for Donald Trump, but he's not going to vote for Joe Biden either. So zero's out. But I guess not voting for Trump is a good thing to start, right?
Screw John Bolton. Rick, every time I talk about him, I have to begin with that. Screw him. It has to continue to be said. His country called him in January and February, and he didn't answer that call. He worked for this man. He said this man is unfit. He said this man committed impeachable acts, and yet he didn't tell the country that. I'll be bothered by this every single day. I don't give a damn how many books he sells.
Right. No, and he's selling a lot. I mean, it's crazy. But, at the end of this, my point exactly, and I was saying during the whole time that the impeachment was going on, where is Bolton? I want to know what the drug deal he was talking about. And in the book, he goes into it. He had all the notes.
Yeah. And it wasn't just Ukraine. I mean, think about what Bolton has said in the book. Ukraine was just one example of this president abusing the powers of his office with other foreign leaders to just get reelected. Look, I don't know Bolton. I've known of Bolton for a long time. He's a rock-solid conservative, but he's an arrogant SOB who is utterly tone-deaf. And for him not to understand that most of the country will be pissed at him for what he did to save this for a book, again, I don't care how many books he sells. He'll probably do well, but screw him.
Yeah, but his argument in the book is that, it was impeachment malpractice, Joe, that the Democrats didn't subpoena him and the Senate didn't call him, so that's how he clears his conscience.
He could have walked up to Capitol Hill. He could have hopped in a cab and taken a cab or an Uber up to Capitol Hill and volunteered to testify. And again, the arrogance, Rick, of the man. I didn't partake in that impeachment process because the Democrats blew it. Here's how they should have impeached him. And then the arrogance, Rick, of the man. They just focused on the Ukrainian call. They should have focused on all of this other stuff. Well, screw you, Bolton. You had all of the notes for all of the other stuff. It's incredibly frustrating.
No, and it's angering. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to, because the reason that I wanted to talk to John Bolton is because there are flag waving Trump supporters still out there who think Donald Trump has the best interest of them and the country at heart. Donald's a flag waving, God fearing American who cares about everyone. And Bolton's story is, for my disdain for him and the all this stuff is still, I think, important to possibly reach those souls. Because I guess I'm stupid and I just can't give up on them.
But Rick, they're not going to read. Trump's followers, Trump's cultists are not going to read this book. And like Fox News, Bolton was a Fox News contributor. As far as Fox News and Trump supporters are, Bolton's a turncoat. So they're not going to give his book the time of day. And the other thing that just bugs the hell out of me with Bolton is the thing that bugs the hell out of me with everybody. If you believe Donald Trump is unfit to be president, and you don't then vote for the only person who can beat him, well, then you don't really believe Donald Trump is unfit to be president. Screw you.
Yeah. Well,
if you don't vote for Joe Biden, the only guy who can beat Trump.
No, you're absolutely right. But, I threw it out to him. I'm going, what are you going to do when you go to jail? Because if Trump's reelected, I fully expect, dear leader, to pursue, Bolton behind bars.
Well, and remember what the judge's ruling basically was, it's too late for me to stop the publication of this book. But yeah, Bolton, you screwed up. There's classified information in that book. There's a decent chance, Rick, that Bolton is going to get hit legally down the road no matter what happens to Trump.
So you think Biden would go back after him?
I don't know if Biden will, but I think even if Trump loses, I think people around Trump, if they want to pursue this, the judge's ruling was you're in trouble. You may have to abandon your royalties. You conveyed classified information. So he left that open. I don't know technically who has the right to pursue it, but he could be in trouble.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I read the book, and it's a long book. And, while it did confirm all of the things that, I've believed and we've talked about here on the show, like you said, I just had this, this in the pit of my stomach anger. And I guess this is the problem that I have in the country right now, that there are so few patriots, that there are so few people willing to do what you've done and say, hey, look, I've been wrong in the past, and I'm going to try and atone for that for the good of the country. And, I just in the pit of my stomach, just had this kind of anger.
Well, and Rick, again, pardon me if I come across as super angry, because this really hits me personally. I lost everything. Because I stopped supporting Trump, I lost my syndicated radio show, and then I decided to primary Trump, and I lost everything. So it really, and I'm not the only one, but it really bothers me when people on our side don't have the balls to do publicly what is the right thing. People who worked for Trump, Fiona Hill, who worked for Bolton, Fiona Hill risked it all. Vindman, they all did. But Bolton hid behind a book. Yeah.
Now, you bring up Vindman. Do you support Tammy Duckworth's holding up the promotions of, 1,100 other folks because Vindman's not going to get the promotion he deserves?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I ran against Duckworth. We had an ugly campaign. That was a while ago. I think she's spot on in that, in what she said today. Yes. And I also think Duckworth is interesting because she's really going after Trump hard of late, calling him out. What a coward he is, and calling him out on his draft dodging and this Russian bounty business. If this doesn't turn more people, nothing will.
No, I was going to ask you about that because there are a couple of stories that I hope conservatives look at. One of it being this bounty thing, which I want to talk about in a second, but this one today that came out. that the AP reported on, that Army General Mark Milley, chairman of Joint Chief of Staff, he confirmed that some of the soldiers that were mobilized in D.C. To respond to the protests that were going on actually were issued bayonets.
Yeah.
And to me, you go, and also they weren't trained in riot response. So you got a bunch of people out there, without the training. And look, I don't want military riot trained people on our streets. That's a whole nother conversation. But this is one of those things where you go, is this not a wake up call for those conservatives who don't want the military being used against U.S. citizens on our home soil?
No.
Again, no.
Look, Rick, I know I come from that world. I'm telling you, nothing will turn these Trump supporters. I mean that. And these Senate Republicans, it doesn't matter what comes out. They will not turn on him. They will go down with Trump until the bitter end. And which is why, again, as a Tea Party conservative, I'm out there doing whatever I can, not just to help Biden win. I think every one of these Senate Republicans who's up for re-election this year has to lose as well. They've enabled Trump. It's all of them. They've just got to go.
So as someone who has been, like almost a founding member of the Tea Party,
yeah,
what do you say to those Tea Party people who, I don't know where they are now? I mean, I remember during the Obama years screaming about debt and deficits and all kinds of stuff, and yet I hear nothing from. It's like they just disappeared.
I think you and I have talked about this. I do believe truly there were two strands to the Tea Party movement. There was the one you just identified, the debt and the deficit and the size of government. That was the part that I related to. But there was kind of an ugly nationalist streak to the Tea Party as well. That's the side, Rick, that Trump tapped into in 2016. And so they don't give a damn about the debt. They don't give a damn about fiscal responsibility. They've latched on to Trump because he's promised to bring back 1950s white America for them. And sadly, that's all they care about now.
Yeah, and none of this, none of the Russia stuff plays in. I mean, yesterday we found out that evidently Trump pulled this I don't even know how to put it, where if a foreign government, goes and tries to give information to a campaign or approaches a campaign, that they've got to report it to the FBI. It was in the Defense Authorization Bill, and Trump had it pulled out. And you go, what senator would allow that in this moment with the story of bounties on the heads of American citizens? I mean, it's incredible to me.
Well, but to what you just said, Trump had it pulled out, but the Senate Republicans pulled it out. So
Right.
the Senate Republicans joined Trump in saying, we don't care if a foreign entity screws with our 2020 election. Look, Rick, I've gotten a lot of heat because I have called Donald Trump a traitor. I believe, broadly speaking, he is. He's betrayed this country repeatedly. But it pains me. I mean, nobody on my side cares. Conservatives don't care. The Republicans don't care. It's become a cult. This guy can do no wrong, even betraying the country.
So basically, my original premise of their fives, leave them alone, move on and deal what you can deal with. That's probably the best way to go.
Definitely. Yes.
Because, I come back to this moment of, I want to believe that all of us believe, love our country. All of us, want similar things. And yet, I look at what's being presented in front of me, and I worry for the future of this country.
Well, and here's what I wonder, Rick. Look, Trump's a horrible human being. We've never had something like this. And my side, unfortunately, became a cult, and they don't acknowledge who he is. I often wonder if the first horrible human being was a Democratic president, would your side have done the same thing, like become a cult and not acknowledged any wrongdoing? Here's the beauty, though, of Trump. I really do believe that if there's a Democratic version of Trump that comes along one day,
right,
I do believe the Democrats, and I think all of us have learned from Trump, I think the vast majority of Democrats, if they had their own Trump in 8 years, they would stand up against him. I think we've learned from this. I really do.
No, I mean, I go back to the Obama years. There was nobody more critical of Obama than I was. I had much higher hopes for him. And today I got a bunch of responses from people because we had a guest yesterday who accused Trump of raping a 13-year-old. And there is a suit out there that's been withdrawn, and there's some background on that. But they're saying, well, Bill Clinton. And I'm like, if Bill Clinton was accused of raping a 13-year-old and there was a case going forward, I'd be the first one to say, let's try him. And if he's guilty, throw his behind in jail and let him rot. It's not about who, it's about what.
Yeah, I think that's right, Rick. And again, I think my side, the conservative Tea Party side, the Republican base, not in their defense, but just to explain why they've become a cult, they felt beat down for so long, like the media didn't give them a fair shake, the party ignored them, and along came a demagogue. And even though Trump's full of you-know-what, he told them, I hear you, I'll build the wall, I'll keep brown people out, I'll bring back manufacturing, I'll bring back 1950s America. It was all a con, but he was the first guy who said, I hear you.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And
and they embraced him, and they can't let go.
No, I go back to when I first said he was going to win, which was April of 2016. I went back for a funeral, and all of my family, who is basically the basket of deplorables, who lived through the deindustrialization of the Reagan years,
right?
Lost all those good union jobs and that American dream standard of living, and they listened and they heard Trump. They're going to bring, Brook Park Avenue is going to have all those factories back. And those are going to be good union jobs, and we're going to be okay. And well, it hasn't worked out that way. In fact, it's gone completely the other way for them.
Yes. Now, when you look at Trump's numbers, Rick, he's in the toilet. And so even though he'll always have his hardcore support, I got to tell you, he's losing Republicans, more reasonable Republicans, by the day. And I just don't see how he turns that around.
So then let me ask you a last line of questioning in that, because, that was kind of where I was going to go. Yesterday we talked about a group of W era officials, like 200 of them, starting a super PAC. I think it was 43 alumni for Biden. There's a bunch of this stuff popping up where Republicans are starting these super PACs to help Biden. I go, okay, that's great, but what happens on the other side?
Well, it's a great question, and here's the deal. And I am actually launching a new group next week. It's more of a grassroots effort to get Republicans in the key states to recruit other Republicans. So I will join all of these groups trying to get Republicans to vote for Biden. What comes afterwards? Whenever people ask me that question, Rick, my answer is always the same. I don't give a damn. This guy's a cancer. We just have to get him out of the White House.
That's it. So now, we cure the cancer, and then we go back to fighting each other like hell.
Well, but again, we've learned from Trump, so I think we'll fight more respectfully because we don't want to be like Trump. But yeah, look, if you carry out what I'm trying to do, I want Joe Biden president, and I want the Democrats to take control of the Senate. Now, I know if that happens, there may be policy down the road that I don't like. I would much rather fight policy than a dictator in the Oval Office. That's easy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And as you open this and as you begin, I hope you'll come and share with us what you're doing and let us know how things are going.
Always, Rick. I love to be with you, man. You're a fighter and a patriot, brother.
Appreciate it, Joe. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Good stuff. Joe Walsh, former congressman and former Republican candidate for president. And like he said, look, here's a guy who lost everything. And he did. He had a nationally syndicated radio program and was really critical of Trump. And they don't like that on that side. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. That was the day that 3,800 workers at the Carnegie Steel Company in Homestead, Pennsylvania, were thrown into the streets and locked out of their jobs. The plant was located 7 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The general manager of the plant, Henry Clay Frick, was determined to break the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers Union. The union had won a strong contract 3 years before, and Frick wanted to weaken their position. The union only represented the skilled workers in the plant. Frick calculated he could break the union because they only accounted for less than a fifth of the workforce. But when Frick began to slash wages and demand increased production, even the unorganized workers voted overwhelmingly to support a strike. The workers refused to accept the changes, and Frick locked them out. Conveniently, Andrew Carnegie was traveling in England and Scotland during the conflict, but he supported his manager's decision. Carnegie sent Frick a message reading, "We approve of anything you do. We are with you to the end." Frick ordered the construction of a giant wall around the plant. The wall stretched 3 miles long and 12 feet high and was topped with sharp barbed wire. The workers called it Fort Frick. They, in turn, organized Homestead. Picket shifts and patrols were formed. Frick sent in his personal army of 300 Pinkertons on a barge to try and sneak into town. The workers' patrol spotted the barge and sounded an alarm. Frick's Pinkertons were met by thousands of workers in a bloody battle. 9 workers and 3 Pinkertons were killed. In the end, Pennsylvania's governor sent in the state militia, thus clearing the way for scabs to enter the plant. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I got to tell you, this is one of those days where you go, look, I've talked to Ambassador Bolton, who I don't agree with on anything. Other than Trump is terrible, he's traitorous, he's unfit for office and shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office and the Resolute Desk. And Joe Walsh, who I policy-wise never agreed with while he was in Congress. Again, we agree on Donald Trump is disastrous, traitorous, treasonous. You throw all that in there, and a clear and present danger to the country. And what I struggle with is these people are unreachable. Look, I read through Bolton's book, and look, it's full of his side of the story. Yes, a lot of chronology. This. His notes must be impeccable, and heavy on the assault on Barack Obama. But it lays it out in very, very clear language. This president is disastrous. And as he said, a second term would be really, really horrible. And, he said he worries about a second term. I fear a second term. And if I were him, I would fear it too, because I guarantee Trump's reelected, he's going to jail. And we're just in one of these moments where, I'm someone who, look at all the stories, look at all the facts, look at what I can, and then I make an opinion. Like I said, when Barack Obama was president, there were a lot of things I disagreed with, a lot of things I thought he should have done better or different or on, and we talked about it all during that period. I never got the feeling that he was trading the country down the river. I never got the feeling that he was in it for himself, first and foremost and only. Bolton lays it out in the book that it's all about Trump. Everything he does is about re-election, is about enriching himself. Everything is about Trump. And, you then, you fast forward that to these rallies that they want to have, where we're in the middle of this pandemic, where it's clear he doesn't give a rat's behind about anybody in that audience. The only person that he cares about is him. And the reason the campaign puts him up there, and the reason that the White House officials want him out there, is because it's like a pacifier. Like a little baby, you give them a pacifier and they stop crying. This is what these rallies are for Trump. And the people who are there they're just props. And their health doesn't mean anything. Understand, we are still talking about destroying the Affordable Care Act. There is a Supreme Court case that quite possibly could end the ACA at a time when people need health insurance the most, at a time when unemployment is at really high levels. They're going to talk about literally stripping that away from people in the worst possible moment, and they're okay with it because it's all about winning. And this again, I come back to my problem with the Tea Party of what's left and the flag-waving Trump supporter. It's not about country. It's not about what's best for our grandchildren in the future. It's about me here now. It's about my team. It's about, sticking it to you libtards. And you go, but you're harming yourselves. Do you not get that? And here's the sad reality. Most of the people who are the most, loud, vocal Trumpites, they're not the ones who are harmed by this. They're the ones who this country, the privileges that they've gotten are so enormous. And they're doing all right. The two that came out on the walkway there with their AR-15 and her little pea shooter in St. Louis because some black people walked by their house. Those folks are enormously privileged. And as personal injury lawyers, you would think that they would be out there marching with them. But no, that's not what it's about at all. Had Barack Obama, during the protests that happened during his time in office, had he called the military, had they issued bayonets to soldiers back then, had that administration done that, you would have heard me screaming, much like I am now. Had the Obama administration called an adversary and said, "Hey, I need to get reelected. Buy a bunch of our agricultural goods. I need to look like I'm winning this trade war." And who knows what he had to give up to get that. Had Barack Obama called a foreign leader and said, "Hey, I need you to dig up some dirt on my political opponent, or I'm gonna hold back vital aid," and it's in Bolton's book that everything that the Democrats claimed, everything that Adam Schiff laid out during the impeachment was accurate. And this is why, thank goodness for Joe Walsh. Screw John Bolton. That's the right response. He could have stepped forward. He could have stepped up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a patriot. I'm going to be a statesman. I'm going to do what's right." Instead of, and Walsh is right, instead of hiding behind some excuse after the fact. And to be honest, I found his excuses to be, fairly lame in the book as well. The reality is, and whether you believed, and Bolton answered to the question to me, he said, "Well, I don't think you would have held him accountable because the Republicans weren't going to convict in the Senate." And everybody agreed at that. But had he come forward at that moment and said, "Look, this is what I know. This is what happened. This is what's troubling to me. This is my country and I'm going to stand up for it," maybe some of those senators would have turned. Maybe some of those senators would have gotten the courage that they have in the cloakroom to speak out against Trump and actually done it in public. Maybe it wouldn't have only been Justin Amash and Mitt Romney. But here's the thing, nobody did that. John Bolton didn't do that. And he's going to make millions of dollars off the book possibly. But again, like Joe Walsh said, they could claw all that back. And I hope they do. I've said this from the beginning. I had hoped they would have put an injunction on the book and not allowed it. And I would hoped it would have gotten out there and people would have read it. and he wouldn't have made a dime off of it because it's disgraceful. Disgraceful. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Will you read the book? Does it matter that Trump is basically a lying, cheating, no good narcissist? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
It's been pointed out that Donnie Trump has unusually small hands. But who cares? What's truly alarming are his unusually small policy ideas. Draining the swamp, for example. He bragged that he'd be stronger than Drano, promising he'd rid Washington of its infestation with lobbyists, corporate favor seekers, and other swamp critters. But he betrayed that populist pledge from the very start, staffing his entire presidency with CEOs, lobbyists, and Republican megadonors who are gleefully rigging the system for themselves against the rest of us. Also, remember how candidate Trump blistered the behinds of Wall Street's billionaire hedge fund hucksters for getting rich by destroying middle-class jobs? He promised that, by gollies, he would take away their loophole that lets them escape paying taxes they owe. But as president, he wimped out, handing a $1 trillion tax cut to the billionaires, including meekly leaving the pampered hedge funders' loophole entirely untouched. And where's that Make America Great guy who claimed that only he had the vision and chutzpah to rebuild America, pledging to launch a $1 trillion investment in our national infrastructure? His chutzpah petered out and his vision shriveled to a hokey scheme of smoke and mirrors, basically asking states and corporations to come up with the money and calling on them to privatize our public infrastructure. Where's the greatness in that? This is Jim Hightower saying, poor Donnie wants to be thought of as a modern-day Teddy Roosevelt, so he constantly poses as a populist, bigger-than-life bull moose character who's got the right stuff to bust the profiteering trusts in order to stop their rip-offs and their schemes to knock down the middle class. Sadly, though, a pose is all it is, for he's just a run-of-the-mill plutocratic president who speaks loudly but carries nothing bigger than a limp twig when it comes to dealing with the corporate powers.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, some good news coming out of Oklahoma. Kind of weird, but some actual good news, because on Tuesday, the voters there in Oklahoma voted to alter their state constitution and expand Medicaid. That means that some 250,000 additional residents of Oklahoma will be eligible for Obamacare, the dreaded Obamacare. And, you know, look, Oklahoma's a red of the red state. Interesting how Trump has made the Affordable Care Act very popular. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on that and other top stories of the day, I've asked our good friend Sarah Burris to come back and share some thoughts. She's a fabulous reporter over at Raw Story. Make sure you check out their work. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Congratulations to the great state of Oklahoma.
Yeah, so good on Oklahoma. It's only taken a decade, but good on them.
You know what's interesting about that is about 200,000 Oklahomans will now have health insurance when they didn't before. One of the ads that they ran, the first ad that they ran for the to get people to vote for it, was really amazing. It was a couple in the car, pregnant woman, you know, deep breathing. She's like, please just hurry, just hurry. And he's like, I'm driving fast. And they get to the hospital and the hospital's closed. And I was like, oh my God, that's really powerful, because that really is what's happening in Oklahoma. There are some counties in Oklahoma who have a 40% infant mortality rate, 40, because they have no hospitals, they have no medical clinics. And then you end up with people who live on the border, so like way up north, north of Tulsa, Miami, and way down south right by Texas, where the nearest hospital for them is in another state, and they don't, it's out of network for them if they go to another state for their health insurance. So all of these people who, who basically don't have access to adequate medical care now will. And the vote for it was interesting because it was the urban areas and around the borders where people actually voted to support it.
Really, it wasn't the rural areas, because the rural communities that I know of, they're living the reality that you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's no medical infrastructure. The hospitals are closing down because they can't afford to keep them open. And I'm surprised that it's not the rural areas screaming for help, because they're the ones who need it right now the most.
And you would think that they would understand that, but it's like they didn't really make the connection to it. I think it's because they thought, oh, Obamacare, that's that dirty word. But the urban areas, which wouldn't benefit from this, supported it. So now all these rural people have access to health care thanks to the urban areas.
Yeah, I got to tell you, though, Oklahoma, I don't think urban area when I think Oklahoma.
I know, right? We have some pretty big, so Oklahoma City is actually the third largest city in area because everything is so spread out.
Right.
So, Oklahoma City is really, really big. And we have, like moderate sized cities that are just closer kind of together, like Tulsa is an hour and a half away. Lawton is like hour and a half, 2 hours away. So stuff is actually pretty close together because the state is pretty small. It's just once you start talking about way down in Southeast or way up in Northeast or in the Panhandle, that's where people start losing access to healthcare.
Yeah, well, good on the folks of Oklahoma. But while I'm saying good on folks in Oklahoma, there's another Oklahoma story that caught my attention. Evidently, someone wanted to steal a Nazi flag. I'm guessing she was probably drunk at a party and there was a dare, and she ends up getting shot by this crazy guy over a stupid flag.
Yeah, that's like the most typical Oklahoma story ever. The way that could be more Oklahoma is if that flag was like an OSU Cowboys flag or something. Like I could see that happening where somebody would shoot somebody for stealing their football flag. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, well, at least you got the 2 step forward, because now maybe that woman will get medical care. At last I saw she was listed in good condition after being shot and left in a ditch over a stupid Nazi flag. I hope the guy goes to jail for a long time.
Yeah, and he'll get along really well with a lot of people in prison who are not Nazis. Have fun with that.
Speaking of Nazi flags, you had a story today or it was yesterday actually, on the Trump shirts. That I actually saw one of these shirts, the America First, Trump 2020 shirts with the eagle on this round thing, and as you point out, it looks exactly like the Nazi symbol.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, that's pretty much similar to like the symbol for the Marines or like the eagle that's on the dollar." No, it's really not. The difference is this is a bird with its wings outstretched. Its head is turned a certain way, and its claws are clutching a circle shield with something inside of it. In the Trump version, it's an American flag. In the Nazi version, it's a swastika. It's a little bit more, obviously the Nazi one is a little bit more Art Deco because of the time. But if you there was somebody who laid the images on top of each other and were like, see, they're nothing alike. And I was like, actually, that kind of looks like they really are.
Exactly alike.
And it's just like, I really don't think, obviously Trump doesn't have any involvement in, I want this shirt or whatever, but it's very clear that people who work for him know exactly what they're doing.
Right. And they're speaking, as Joe Walsh, who we just had on the program, said, there were two veins of the Tea Party. There were the ones that worried about, debt and deficits and smaller government, which he claimed to be part of. And then there's this part. They're the white supremacists, the Nazi sympathizers, the people who, this speaks to.
Yeah, exactly. And, this is one of those things where it's just like over and over again, we keep getting these things where there'll be an image like the Hillary Clinton image with the Star of David or the red triangle, like from the Holocaust. And it's just like, after a while, there are so many of these. You're like, this is not something that, Yeah.
Yeah,
If it happened once, I would say maybe, but after so many times, you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah, there's thought that goes into this. Anyway, today the big story today that we have here on the program is I had Ambassador John Bolton on the program talking about his book. And I'm still going to side with Joe Walsh. Screw John Bolton on this. But the book, I got it for free. Thank you there to the PR company who sent it to me. I got to read it.
I got it for free too, but not because of the PR.
Thank you to the PR company who booked it. I got to read the book for free. But here's the thing: it does confirm virtually everything that we've been talking about and that I've been talking about on this program. You think it's going to matter?
No, I don't think so. And that's one of the things that John Bolton actually talks about that I do agree with him on. He said that he was not going to testify because it wasn't going to make any difference anyway. I would like to think that if he did testify, what would have made a difference is it would have changed the way that the public really sees things. And that might move a couple of senators, maybe. I don't necessarily think so, but I think the public more than anything deserves to have this information. And they really did deserve to have it during the impeachment. And that's what really frustrates me. I don't feel like when you agree to serve in government, it's something that I really take seriously. It's you are dedicating your life to this country and agreeing to do whatever it takes to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's a really serious thing to me. And he failed to do that. He chose, to have a nice, cushy book deal and not to stand up and say, hang on a minute, guys, here's what you need to know during this impeachment. And that was the one thing that I think we really would have benefited from, maybe not in terms of votes, but I think for the rest of the country, we needed to know that.
What do you say to his assertion that, the impeachment process was, in his words, impeachment malpractice, and that the Democrats should have done much more and should have, done all these different things? And look, I agree with him on it should have been much wider and there should have been all crimes involved. But what do you say to that justification?
Actually, I do agree with him, and I do think it should have been more. I think that was something we all were screaming about at the time. I get, though, why the Democrats did what they did, because they knew when it went to the Senate that it was going to be a complete waste of time and that the Republicans were never going to vote to convict him. So it really was kind of like a trial where Democrats were really trying this in the case of public opinion. And I think that's the reason that they were like, I don't want to relitigate the Russian stuff. And that really bothers me because it's like, those are really important issues. And now we're seeing them come back with this stupid Russia bounty story where they're paying to kill our troops. And so I think these are just like, it's so many different things that, he is right. But at the same time, it's like, that's kind of a black and white way of viewing things. And I feel like that's one of his greatest flaws, is that he really views things one way or the other, and that's really not how things are in the world.
Isn't that base conservatism? I mean, isn't that what basic conservative?
That's true.
That's their worldview. It's right or wrong. It's black or white.
Yeah.
There's no gray. It's strictly by the book.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And for John Bolton, the only thing gray is his mustache.
And the pursuit of green for his wallet. But the other part of this is, he does talk about in the book that Russia attacked us in 2016, and that they continue to do this, and this administration has left us at every turn vulnerable. And when I asked him about the bounty story, he went into an op-ed written by Susan Rice, who said that if it were her and someone were to come to her with that kind of information, she would have immediately gone to the president with it. And he said that he agreed with her. So I'm going to take that as him saying that he did it, that, he can't come out and say, yes, I briefed him. But to me, that's him saying, yeah, I did.
And I think that's right on the way that Susan Rice framed it. She was like, look, I think if you don't have confirmation, you go to the president and say, look, here's what we know so far. Here's what we need to confirm. I want to let you know, like, we're going to move forward with, here are the things that we're going to do to figure out that this is true, to confirm it, to work with our allies, to figure out what steps we're going to do if it is true. There's a whole apparatus that goes into what's next mode whenever you get this kind of information. That system fails in the Trump administration, and we deserve to know why. Not just because why Trump didn't read it in the presidential daily briefing, why no person held up little flashcards for him in his little flashcard briefing, but I think why we then are not acting. That's the thing about Russia is over the years you see just letting them go and do whatever they want, they will keep pushing back. And if you don't fight back against them, they're going to keep doing it. We need to sit them down in a timeout. And I think, unless we get another leader in there, we're going to end up with serious issues with Russia by the time Trump is gone.
No, and we're already in a situation with serious issues with Russia, especially over Ukraine. And, we're much worse off than we were with China. Trump has done nothing positive on that vein. And Bolton even goes into that. I mean, it was all about Crimea. What's that?
There's still Russian troops in Crimea.
Exactly. And in the Donbas province, evidently, they're still there. And they're still doing all of the things that they did to meddle in our elections. They're still doing all of the things that happened in 2016. And we've done nothing to rein them in. In fact, just yesterday, I'm sure you've seen this, the Republican senators pulled out of the Defense Authorization Act a requirement that presidential campaigns or any campaign report if a foreign country approaches you, which seems like in this moment the most common sense of common sense pieces of legislation, and yet Trump, through the Republican senators, had it ripped out.
Exactly, and there was another thing that Pelosi said in her weekly press briefing today. She said that whenever they did the Russian sanctions against Russia, that the White House wanted to have them pull out sanctions against the GRU, the Russian intelligence service. So sanctions were applied to the country, but not the intelligence service, which I wonder if that's why they then funneled all the money to the Afghan contractor through the GRU and not just like, hey, here's Putin writing a check for something. So there are just so many problems with this. And again, it's just, if you don't act, if you don't, put your foot down with Russia, then they're just going to keep doing this forever. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's weak. It makes Trump look so weak. That's what he's supposed to be this big, strong man, right? He just looks like a big old candy ass up against Vladimir Putin every single time.
Yeah, I mean, at least Obama's got the picture where him and Putin are looking eye to eye and Obama's looking sternly down at him. I mean, at least he's got that. Trump doesn't even have that. He's got, Helsinki.
Yeah, that's all he's got. And I know everybody says this and it's a total conspiracy theory, but what the hell does Putin have on him that is making him do this?
Does it come back to the P tapes?
Ridiculous. It may. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
I mean, because again, I keep looking at this, and I know Trump keeps saying, no one's been tougher on Russia, and no one, we've done this and we've done that. I'm going, no, I haven't seen that. I'm sorry, and if you're doing something, it ain't working. Yeah,
the toughness is really just like a passive, like, oh, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to be able to get away with whatever he's asking me to do.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we'll do sanctions, but not against the GRU. He's fighting to get Russia back in the G8. And while all of this is going on with Russia trying to kill American soldiers, and he's trying to bring Russia back into the G8, what the hell, dude?
Yeah, but it's you do know, sir, it's a hoax. It's a liberal media hoax.
Everything's a hoax. Everything's a hoax.
It's all a hoax. If it's bad, it's a hoax.
If it's real, it's probably Trump saying it's a hoax.
It really is. But and going back to the book, there were a bunch of things in there that were just kind of weird. And one of them being Trump didn't actually know that Britain is a nuclear power, and you go, I'm not that bright, but I know that, and I'm not someone who has control of one of those nuke buttons. I think I want a president who's a little bit smarter. And look, I'm not a fan of Bolton's by any stretch of the imagination, but the book does kind of open up a window to just how little this guy knows. And this is one of those moments where, I know it's a failure, but I keep trying to get conservatives, of which I know I've got a bunch of listeners, to go, this guy is not bright. This guy is all about himself, and it's just embarrassing.
My favorite story was him not knowing that Norway wasn't part of Russia. It's like, it's named Norway, like that alone, right? This is not like you need to know your geography. You need to know, like, that Norway is got by Sweden and Finland and what the capital is. And like, I get it. You don't have to know how to spell fjord or whatever, but it's not part of Russia. It's called Norway. Come on, dude.
I think my favorite one is that Trump insisted, and it was fixated on getting a CD of Elton John's Rocket Man to Kim Jong-un. I'm going, I know they were exchanging love letters for a while, because he did say that, they were in love and they were, nice letters back and forth. And I know this was a special gift. But, I don't know, man. I don't know.
So the first time around that I read that story, I kind of half-assed read the story, and I read that, it was an autographed copy, and I was like, oh, that's interesting that Elton John would autograph a copy. And then I read it again from the Bolton book and was like, oh no, it was Trump's autograph. I was like, oh, that's just embarrassing. That's just really sad.
Maybe a little lipstick, a kiss on it, and all of that. It's really very scary. But here's the thing. There's part of me that's kind of hopeful, because the polling numbers, looking really bad for him. In fact, there was one yesterday, a USA Today poll that we talked about, that 67% of the people that they polled think Joe Biden has the experience to be president, while the current president, only 37% think he has the experience to be president. I'm feeling a little bit okay. Biden's margin like 12 points. I'm feeling okay, but I'm in this weird world where I don't trust these people.
We cannot take our foot off the gas.
Exactly.
At all. We absolutely cannot. We need to make sure that every single person, because I can't remember who it was that said it, but it was like, we need to vote such that when Russia tries to steal it, they can't. And I think that's probably the most important thing in the world. One of the things that I wrote about today that was talking a little bit about, it was an op-ed by Paul Waldman in the Washington Post, where he talks about, Brad Parscale did his own op-ed in the Post that talked about how everything is great. We're spending all this money, we're making all these voter contacts, we've got these crazy ad buys going and everything. What Paul said is, look at their spending that they've had. Yes, they have raised almost $1 billion, but they have spent $650 million on this campaign, and they're anywhere from 10 to 12 points down. That's how much money to be that far down. So whatever they're doing, it's not working, and two, they're not really crafty enough to evolve their strategy.
Right.
Their strategy is just like, we have to do whatever it takes to get him back to rallies.
That's it.
Right?
That's
the strategy.
That's their strategy. Get them back out in front of people and make them sick. Like in Tulsa, where evidently, and I don't know if you saw the story, I talked about it at the beginning, Herman Cain showed up to the Tulsa rally. Herman Cain now has coronavirus.
That's instant karma. I mean, Herman Cain talking on Twitter about how it's dumb to wear a mask and he's not going to wear a mask. He shows up in Tulsa without a mask and he gets COVID. I don't know if he got it in Tulsa. I would not be surprised if he did. But yeah, because so many of Trump's people, was it like 8 of his staffers got COVID?
Yeah, I mean, the timing kind of lines up.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. So,
and like I said at the beginning,
karma. That's what that is.
Yeah, I don't wish him dead, but I hope he suffers a little bit.
A little bit.
I guess that's just being really mean of me. But here's the thing. I mean, we're seeing these spikes all over the place, and I don't know what's going on in Tulsa, but I'm looking at places like Texas and Florida. Wow. And in fact, now we find out that the virus is actually mutating, and it's even more contagious than it was before, which is why we're seeing these huge spikes in numbers. Because I don't think we're testing at the rate that they say we are. I just think we got a lot of sick people.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get worse and worse. You know that something is serious is going on if the crazy right-wing governor of Texas says everybody has to wear a mask. That's all you really need to know is if he's going that far, then stuff's going down.
Yeah.
And I think once we see Ron DeSantis make that move, then nobody needs to be leaving the house.
Yeah, then
ever.
it's over. Then it's over. I don't think he will. I think he is so steadfast in his position that they're just going to power right through it. And I was telling my wife, I said, maybe we should get ready to buy some property in Florida in the next year or so, because the oldest state in the country, with the most senior citizens, the oldest state is going to have the most infections. There's going to be a lot of properties for sale soon, and it's all going to be because of Ron DeSantis and the decisions that they're making right now.
Yep, exactly.
It's scary stuff. And finally, I saw this story that you had about Kellyanne Conway and George Conway's daughter Claudia. And the tweet that she put forth of, if you're a woman supporting Trump, I feel bad for you. You must really hate yourself. Lots of internalized misogyny. Yikes. Is that someone, maybe, displacing a little anger towards the mother figure?
Yeah, I don't know. I read an article that she did an interview with USA Today where she was like, look, this isn't about my mother. I love my mother. I think she's great. One of the things that she always taught me to do is have my own opinions and to express them. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And I think that that's incredibly mature for somebody who's that young, and to really understand that she has a platform that she can use, because obviously her dad is stirring up a lot of stuff. But good for her for being like, yeah, I think Joe Biden should bring her on staff and be like, yeah, you should do some TikTok videos for us.
Yeah. Although, I worry that I don't want to smell her hair or something weird, and that would be bad.
No.
No, but here's the thing. And look at, George Conway in the Lincoln Project, incredible stuff. And it keeps making me wondering why Democrats can't do the same thing.
That's one of the things that I've always been so frustrated with, is that Democrats do not show up to play, and they are not willing to fight in the gutter. And it's something that I've always been willing to do whenever I worked on campaigns. And it's been a hard slog to be able to convince my boss, look, you want to fight? This is how we need to do it.
Yeah.
And Democrats are just not willing to be that mean, and Republicans are, and it just makes me crazy. So I really respect what they're doing, because I don't think any Democrat could do it.
That's an excellent point, and it's one that I've made numerous times over the years. The way I usually lay it out is, Democrats, they won't even hold your fight. They won't even hold your coat when there's a fight. They're not like they're going to ball up their little digits and get in there and throw punches. Maybe they'll hold your coat, but probably not. And this is why I think, we've heard, the Democrats have lost the white working class. This is why I think they've lost the white working class, because I think the white working class wants someone right, wrong, or indifferent that's going to get in there, ball up their digits and mix it up. And the Democrats just haven't been that.
Exactly. One of the things that actually I've always admired and done whenever I've hired people is that if you hire people who started out in politics in red states, then they know how to fight. And I think because I came of age in Oklahoma and Kansas and started working in politics in those two states, there's more of a willingness to get down and dirty and do what needs to be done to win. And I think that a lot of the organizers that are from red states, I really admire that they're willing to do it. And a lot of those, the DC types are just not, they don't want to press any buttons. They don't want to push somebody too hard. And it's just like, why? Do you like losing?
No, they're worried about the next campaign that they're going to lose.
Yeah, they need to make money.
That's exactly what it is. Sarah, as always, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. Keep up the great work. I hope folks will check out the website over at rawstory.com, and especially the work done by our good friend Sarah Burris. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you. Be safe.
Oh, as always, good stuff. Thanks. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day known as the East St. Louis Race Riot. It is considered the worst case of labor-related violence of the 20th century and one of the worst race riots in American history. At the time, East St. Louis, Illinois, was an industrial hub along the Mississippi River across from St. Louis, Missouri. Production demands for World War I intensified the Great Migration. As African Americans emigrated from the South, filling the demand for industrial labor, tensions grew at workplaces and in the communities in which they settled. That spring, black and white workers had been hired to scab on a local strike. The violence began on May 28th when trade unionists marched to the mayor's office protesting the black labor they considered unfair competition. It quickly turned into an anti-black riot. The National Guard was called out to quell the violence. And on this day, 2 days of rioting began when a car of white men drove through a black neighborhood and fired at a group of blacks. Racist mobs killed as many as 200 African Americans. 6,000 more were left homeless. Many remarked bitterly that the police and National Guard stood by, indifferent to the race violence around them. The president of the Illinois Federation of Labor insisted that employers were to blame for using Southern blacks to break the back of labor. Socialist Party leader Eugene V. Debs declared that the riots were, quote, a foul blot upon the labor movement. Debs continued, had the labor movement freely opened their doors to the Negro instead of barring him, the atrocious crime of East St. Louis would have never blackened the pages of American history. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
America is no longer...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a real opportunity in Tennessee as Lamar Alexander, the incumbent, the long-time incumbent, announced his retirement a while ago. So this is an opportunity where maybe a chance to pick up a Senate seat and actually get some stuff done, actually undo a lot of the damage that's been done over the last 3.5 years. I got the email today that the Tennessee AFL-CIO president, Billy Dicey, he endorsed my next guest, saying that James Mackler is the right guy at the right time for Tennessee. He says that James will serve Tennesseans with integrity in the Senate, just as he did serving our country in the 101st Airborne Division. He says, I know James will stand up for Tennessee's working families and fight for what's right. And, here's the thing. To me, that's the important part, fighting for what's right. And again, I go back to what having Bolton on the program earlier. Had he stood up at the time that it was important and done what's right, I wouldn't have as much a problem with him. Anyway, that's why I've asked James Mackler to come talk with us. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate in the great state of Tennessee. James, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, Rick, thank you for having me.
So let me jump right in the first question. Why? Why do you want to put yourself into this mess? Why are you throwing you and your family into the fishbowl?
Well, in so many ways, Washington is failing Tennessee. Since I launched my campaign at a closed rural hospital, 3 more have closed, and now Tennessee leads the nation in closed rural hospitals per person. The opioid epidemic is ravaging our communities, and there's no national solution. People aren't even talking about that anymore. The trade war hurts Tennessee's economy more than any other state. You add in COVID-19, and you can see a perfect storm gathering across Tennessee. People want change. Throughout my life, I've chosen service. After we were attacked on 9/11, I closed my law practice. I joined the U.S. Army to do more in a time of crisis. I got an age waiver to go to Army flight school. I learned to fly a Black Hawk helicopter, and I did that in Iraq. When I came back, I became a JAG officer working to protect the survivors of military sexual assault and prosecute criminals. I'm running for the Senate for the same reason I joined the Army. I'm stepping forward to serve the country I love in a time of crisis.
You know, I look at this moment in history where we hear a story coming out that the Russians are putting bounties on the head of soldiers, and we've got a president that hasn't really addressed it. We've got a Senate that I don't think has done enough to address it. So hearing you lay this out and talk about your experience, to me, more than ever, we need somebody who's going to stand up and protect our troops.
You know, it's nothing new for politicians to give lip service to supporting our veterans and our troops and then turning around and doing policies that do just the opposite. But this president has taken that to a whole new level, attacking Gold Star families, lying to troops about pay raises, you know, taking money from a Fort Campbell middle school to fulfill a campaign promise to build a wall, and then holding a military parade using Department of Defense funds to really stoke his own ego, making light of soldiers who suffered traumatic brain injuries, the signature injury of the war on terror. And most offensive to me, he's someone who used his personal connections and personal wealth to avoid service in Vietnam, allowing those who are less fortunate to serve, fight, bleed, and die on his behalf.
Yeah, but if I remember right, when he was talking about the Vietnam era, I think he said something along the lines of his sex life was just like being in Vietnam.
I heard that.
I guess that says a lot about the guy who is occupying our Oval Office. But, you know, in looking at this, you know, another story broke today that I wanted to get your thoughts on. Evidently, this administration called out some of our soldiers to Washington, D.C. and armed them with bayonets. Now, obviously, they didn't get to the streets, but the idea that we would arm soldiers to be on the streets to restrain our right to protest just sends me to a whole nother level.
Folks peacefully protesting are citizens exercising their constitutional rights that I fought to defend on the battlefield and in the courtroom. The president is making tensions worse because I think he believes it helps him personally and politically, but it is irresponsible. Real leaders take responsibility when things go wrong. They share credit when things go well, and we are not seeing that today from Washington. I'll say this, my opponent, Bill Hagerty, he wants the president to invoke the Insurrection Act and militarize our streets. And yet threatening to put the full force of the U.S. military on civilian streets makes about as much sense as defunding the World Health Organization during a pandemic. It's wrong and it's dangerous. I've deployed to a combat zone. I know what that means. The U.S. military should not play a role in quelling violence that's being incited from inside the White House.
No, you're absolutely right. And in writing on your website, you write that the price of inaction is not paid by elected officials in Washington. And listening to you talk about, you know, all of the things that this administration has done that is right now affecting this country in really horrible ways, you know, that statement that you have is never more clear than what we're going through right now. So I guess the question I have is, you know, in this moment, as someone who would be in the Senate, what would you be doing? What's the way forward from where we are at this moment?
When I was in the military, one of my jobs, in addition to being a pilot, was being an Army lawyer later on in my career. And an important part of that job meant being able to tell commanders who might have greatly outranked me, "Sir, ma'am, we can't do that, or we can't do that way." We need leaders who have the integrity and the honor and the courage to speak truth to power. The second part of that, and I'm going to answer this with a bit of a war story. Shortly after I got to Iraq, it was November of 2005. I was flying a combat mission at night. And that means we were flying with night vision goggles. And what that means is that everything looks like basically a green screen with a very narrow field of view. And they're difficult flight conditions. Well, we were flying that mission and we flew into a dust storm. That is an emergency situation. And it's a situation that we prepare for because good leaders prepare for the unexpected and are ready to respond. We flew into that dust storm. We were flying just a few hundred feet above the ground in tight formation, but we implemented our emergency procedures. We had a mission to accomplish that night, to get home alive. I didn't know if the person next to me was a Democrat or a Republican. I didn't know if the people behind me were conservatives or liberals, but we had each other's back. We were going to get this done. Members of the Congress have the exact same mission. They have to get their mission done. They've got to make lives better for the people of Tennessee and the people they serve. And when I get to the U.S. Senate, I will work with anyone I need to who wants to make lives better, because it's a matter of working with the team to accomplish a mission. That's what I hope to do when I get to the
And that's music to my ears. I mean, at the end of the day, our political system has become so polarized that we're gridlocked to the point to where nothing gets done, and working families are struggling. I mean, I talked about at the beginning of the show that, the sad reality is, over the last 40 years, the standard of living of the average working class American has gotten much worse. Costs are up, housing costs are up, wages are down, healthcare benefits aren't there, retirement is almost non-existent. We're in this world where we're heading towards a crisis, and it appears nobody's doing anything about it to stave it off, which is why I think there's so much anger in this country and why voters are so frustrated.
Well, a hard day's work should earn a living wage. We need to rebuild the middle class. A living wage might look different in different communities, but sticking with $7.25, that amount hasn't changed a penny in over a decade. That's not enough. No. $15 an hour, that's $31,000 a year before taxes. I support that. And what we really need to do is create good, high-paying jobs. And there's an important role for the federal government to play there, investing in infrastructure and education and clean energy. We can't accept a system where people are stuck in 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs forever just to make ends meet, because that doesn't leave any time for family, for education, or for trying to find a better job.
Yeah. Whatever happened to the old labor call of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. And I've been calling for a long time now. If automation is coming and technology is going to replace a bunch of jobs, maybe we need to be moving that 40-hour work week down to a 32-hour work week. Maybe we need to be talking about getting people higher wages and less hours so that they can support and do those other things that they want to do. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with James Mackler, candidate for U.S. Senate in the state of Tennessee. His website, jamesmackler.com. We'll make sure we get links out on our social media. You can also follow him on Twitter, James_Mackler. We'll also get that out as well. Now, as a union guy, and I'm a more than 30-year member of the Teamsters Union, I'm a big supporter of labor unions. I think a lot of our problems economically in this country could be answered by strengthening our right to join and form unions. And fortunately, you got the endorsement of the Tennessee AFL-CIO. In the Senate, there's been no appetite to move legislation that would help us to organize and to make organizing a right. What would you do in the U.S. Senate, being from a state like Tennessee that historically has not been a pro-labor state?
I come from a union family, and I appreciate how important the hard-fought victories of organized labor have been to our country. We cannot take those rights for granted, or else we risk losing them. It's why I joined the AFL-CIO's Workers' Caravan a couple of weeks back to stand up for workers' rights. It's why I'm so honored that the Tennessee AFL-CIO has endorsed me as the best candidate for working families in the Tennessee Open Senate race. In the Senate, I'll work to protect workers' rights to collectively bargain, and we will fight back against these so-called right-to-work laws. At the end of Bill Hagerty's ECD tenure, my likely opponent in this race, Tennessee had the highest rate of minimum wage jobs in the nation. And while he likes to tout his record as a job creator, what he really did was make Tennessee great for his well-connected business friends at the expense of workers. Unlike him, I'll work with local and national leaders to protect workers and rebuild the middle class.
And in protecting workers, a big part of that for me is, safety on the job. And sadly, what's happened to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration during Trump's tenure is it's gone from having a reasonable number of inspectors down to a historic number of low inspectors at a time when we really need to be holding employers accountable to provide safe workplaces in this moment of a global pandemic. And yet I see no appetite out of this administration or really out of our Senate to do any of that.
One of my first jobs out of the Army was working for the Mine Safety and Health Administration's Litigation Backlog Project, because that was an example of a situation where coal miners need justice and companies that put profits ahead of people need to be held accountable. And I was so proud to get to have been part of that effort.
Let me ask you, the other thing that I ask candidates a handful of questions. Obviously, the Teddy Kennedy question, why, and then what's the issue? What issue does James Mackler say this is the one I die on? This is the important one. There's no give on this, because I like to believe that we're going to compromise. We can give or take a little bit, but what's that one close to the soul?
I'm probably going to tell you two. The first issue has got to be healthcare. Our state of Tennessee and our nation are failing Tennesseans in terms of healthcare. We've lost more rural hospitals than any other state. People can't get treatment for our growing opioid crisis. Where you are in Tennessee and who you are in Tennessee affects whether or not you get health care and the quality of that health care. Tennessee needs to expand Medicaid. And if our state's gerrymandered majority won't do that, then it needs to be done at the federal level. We need to bring down the cost of health care, starting with prescription drugs. The government needs to be able to negotiate drug prices directly with manufacturers. We've got to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Right at this moment, Mitch McConnell and Marshall Blackburn are trying to install Bill Hagerty into the United States Senate because he'll support the lawsuit pending in front of the Supreme Court right now, which would take health care away from 1.3 million Tennesseans with pre-existing conditions. And finally, we have to stabilize the exchanges and protect the budget. Lamar Alexander had a bipartisan bill with Patty Murray, which would have done just that. Mitch McConnell never gave it a vote, and I intend to reintroduce that kind of legislation. We need people in the U.S. Senate who believe, as I do, that access to health care is a right, not people like Bill Hagerty who are going to continue day after day to try to take that away from Tennesseans and from other Americans.
So, on the healthcare front, then, so you're not a supporter of something like Medicare for all. You're on the we need to strengthen the exchanges side, then.
Healthcare is the most important issue in the election. We need people in the U.S. Senate who will fight for healthcare, who will fix the Affordable Care Act. I don't know if Medicare for all is the answer, but I do think allow people to buy in at a younger age, 50, see how that goes, and expand from there. We cannot continue with an administration and their allies working to take healthcare away from us.
Yeah, because healthcare, for me, I know a lot of people who are around my age, over 50, who would retire tomorrow if it weren't for healthcare. They would, go on to pursue other endeavors, and that would free up jobs for younger people because we're in this moment, this weird kind of moment where the younger generation being saddled with a lifetime of student loan debt, with diminished opportunities, aren't being able to go into those jobs that would be those next generation family sustaining jobs. And it's harming that generation, I think.
That brings me to my second point. You asked me for just one, but the thing that's very near and dear to my heart is service. And I mean service much more broadly than military service. Every single budget this president has put forward cut service programs, tried to zero out things like AmeriCorps and student loan forgiveness programs for people in public service. And I found through my service that service is an opportunity to meet with and learn from a diverse group of people, to learn new skills, to get money for college. And in this moment where we have such high unemployment, where we need to address infrastructure, where we really need to fill those gaps that you were just talking about, service would be such a wonderful opportunity, and it pays real dividends, real financial dividends. And so we need to be doing everything we can to incentivize national service in this country. And I look forward to spearheading that when I get to the U.S. Senate.
That's something that they've been talking about since I was in high school. It's been something that's been there that I've been in favor of. I think everyone should have the ability to go to college. I think everyone should have the ability to go as far as their talents would take them. And some type of service, to me, is not a bad thing.
I think it would do a lot to heal the wounds in this country.
That's a good thing. You listen to The Rick Smith Show here with James Mackler, candidate for Senate in Tennessee. His website, jamesmackler.com. Make sure you check that out. If you got a couple of bucks, throw it that way. Last two questions I've got for you. Obviously, the one of how can we help? What can folks do to help get you elected? Let's start with that. What can we do?
Throughout my life, I've chosen service. I joined the Army because I felt like I needed to serve the country I love in a time of crisis, and I feel the same way now. Between rural hospitals closing and the opioid epidemic not being addressed and this trade war hurting our economy, we have this perfect storm brewing. People in Tennessee want change, and I am a different kind of candidate, an outsider, a veteran, a man of faith, and that track record of service, it appeals to people all across the state of Tennessee. What we need to do is we need to continue building the team and raising the money to get that story told. So I urge your listeners, go to jamesmackler.com, sign up to volunteer, talk about the race on social media, and as you pointed out, donate what you can. And for anyone from Tennessee, I'm asking you to vote for me in the primary on August 6th and again in November. We will win this U.S. Senate seat when everyone wanting change joins the team to make it happen.
We most certainly need a Democratic senator from Tennessee. And more importantly, we need somebody in the U.S. Senate who's going to stand up and do the right thing. You answered my second question already of why, good stuff. But James, I appreciate you taking time for us. I wish you the best, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again as this continues down the road.
It was my pleasure, and I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, James Mackler. JamesMackler.com, the website. We will get that out on our social media. And like I said, if you got a couple of bucks, these elections are expensive. And look, you know the right is going to have tons of money. We should help some folks out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1822. That was the day that Denmark Vesey was hung for his role in allegedly plotting a slave rebellion. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. That was the day that 3,800 workers at the Carnegie Steel Company in Homestead, Pennsylvania, were thrown into the streets and locked out of their jobs. The plant was located 7 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The general manager of the plant, Henry Clay Frick, was determined to break the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers Union. The union had won a strong contract 3 years before, and Frick wanted to weaken their position. The union only represented the skilled workers in the plant. Frick calculated he could break the union because they only accounted for less than a fifth of the workforce. But when Frick began to slash wages and demand increased production, even the unorganized workers voted overwhelmingly to support a strike. The workers refused to accept the changes, and Frick locked them out. Conveniently, Andrew Carnegie was traveling in England and Scotland during the conflict, but he supported his manager's decision. Carnegie sent Frick a message reading, "We approve of anything you do. We are with you to the end." Frick ordered the construction of a giant wall around the plant. The wall stretched 3 miles long and 12 feet high and was topped with sharp barbed wire. The workers called it Fort Frick. They, in turn, organized Homestead. Picket shifts and patrols were formed. Frick sent in his personal army of 300 Pinkertons on a barge to try and sneak into town. The workers' patrol spotted the barge and sounded an alarm. Frick's Pinkertons were met by thousands of workers in a bloody battle. 9 workers and 3 Pinkertons were killed. In the end, Pennsylvania's governor sent in the state militia, thus clearing the way for scabs to enter the plant. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some interesting news coming out of California. Evidently, they're moving forward on mandating that warehouse workers, and this is one of those things where, this is 2020. You would think that this is stuff that would be already in place. But evidently, this new California bill aims to change the working conditions for warehouse workers and allow them to go to the bathroom. Now, here's the thing. You look at a lot of these warehouses where they track every move you make. In fact, my wife and I were just talking about today the hotel workers who clean hotels. The report is that one of the big chains, and I'm not going to say which one. I don't want to get sued. But they give them like cell phones that barks orders at them all the time. Hyatt that barks orders at them all the time, telling them what to do and tracking their every movement. And it has a panic button on it, which is a good thing. But it's constantly monitoring everything they do, and this happens in warehouses as well. And what California is doing under this increase in the push for productivity, they're now moving on a piece of legislation that would give workers the opportunity to wash their hands, to go to the bathroom, and not have to fear being fired for lack of productivity, or spending too much time off task is how it's usually put. You got to go to the bathroom. You got to go to the bathroom. And, a lot of people are surprised that in a lot of states across this country, as a worker, you don't have a right to go to the bathroom. The employer can say no. And it's one of those surprising little things, but our labor laws are so badly antiquated. They're so far behind. And, this is one of those moments. And talking to someone like James Mackler, coming from Tennessee, where I'm hoping there'll be a moment where the workers of Tennessee wake up and go, we've been getting screwed for so long, and we demand to make better than minimum wage. I'm hoping there's a moment out of this pandemic, out of all of this, that we start looking a little bit differently at how the pie is being divided. It's just one of those things that's been really just frustrating to me. If you live in an at-will state, all of them, you have virtually no rights on the job without a labor contract. I don't know how hard that is to understand, which is why I tell people every CEO in this country's got a contract, because we find out once they get fired, they have a huge golden parachute that pays their retirement and huge amounts of salary and all kinds of stuff. How many workers have those? Well, in this country right now, less than 7% in the private sector, about a little over 10% nationally across all sectors. That means 90% of the workforce has no protection on the job. And that is just mind-blowing to me. And I know the argument I get, well, I don't need no protection. I do my job. Well, that's not entirely always true or helpful, because you can be fired for any reason. And I know we like to believe in the ideas of a meritocracy, and we like to believe that out there's some bit of fairness. There's not. You do what the employer says, or you're fired. And we see this story coming out of Detroit, that evidently some of the Tesla workers and labor activists are complaining that the employees who haven't returned to the Tesla factory out in California, they've been threatened with being fired. Now, these are people who are saying, look, I fear for my life. I fear that you're not going to provide me with a safe work environment. I fear for my life. And Tesla's saying, come back to work, we're going to fire you. And there's nothing in the law. There's nothing in the law that says you have a right to that job, that you have the right to walk off the job if it's unsafe. I know somebody who lives in France, and he says in France, if you believe there's an unsafe work condition, you walk off the job. They can't fire you until that is addressed. And this is one of those moments where, I've been saying this, since the beginning of this pandemic. If employers want people to come back to work, workers need to have the choice. If these Tesla workers feel it's unsafe to go back to work and that their lives would be negatively impacted by going into an unsafe workplace, they should have the choice. Stay on unemployment, collect unemployment, and wait it out. And this would, in my view, do a couple of things. One, it would provide safer workplaces, because if Tesla wants people to come back, they're going to have to provide safer workplaces. They're going to actually have to do what needs to be done to ensure that people are able to come to work and not be exposed. And the other side of it is they're going to have to start paying wages that are worth going to work and dying over. I mean, how many minimum wage jobs is it worth dying over? And I look at, this whole era that we were locked down, and the essential workers in the fast food industry and the food service industry who had to show up to work every day and make basically $7-8 an hour. This is a moment where we need to be raising the minimum wages. We need to be raising the standard of wage structure, the standard of living in this country. And I know, but we're worried about all these businesses staying in business, Rick. We're worried about corporate profits. We're worried about all this stuff. Well, who's going to worry about the little guy? Who's going to worry about the guy or the woman who shows up and busts her behind and doesn't have the right to go to the bathroom and doesn't have the right to protect themselves on the job? Because after all, They're at-will employees. And this Tesla story is just another example of that. And as I've said before, when the employer says you have to come back, you have to come back. That's what our law says. But the great thing? We can change that. We can change the law by changing the people who are in our halls of power. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Grab the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, like I say, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.